helpline on the go. Today, I shall discuss a poem from Flamingo which is taught in CBSE curriculum of Standard 12. The poem under discussion today is an elementary school classroom in a slum, written by Stephen Spander. Move on to the biography part of the poet, that is Stephen Spander. Stephen Spander was an English poet and essayist. He was a post-World War, poet, and his poetry finds expression in the post-World War period of Europe. His famous books include Poem of Dedication, The Age of Being, The Creative Element, etc. The poem highlights on themes of social injustice and class inequalities. Now let's move on to the next segment of the explanation, that is synopsis of the poem. The poem casts doubt about the purpose of education to the slum children. It contains Spander's views about slum schools and the purpose behind establishing such schools. The poet thinks that lives of slum children will remain miserable unless they are educated and shifted elsewhere. The poem is a fine combination of hope and despair for the humanity, unlike the dark vision of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. The poem draws out a real picture of slum children in a school after the post-World War period. Now let's move on to the explanation part of the poem, stanza-wise. So, stanza 1, far from gusty waves, these children like rootless weeds, the hair torn round their pallor, the tall girl with her weighed down head, the paper-seeming boy with rat's eyes. Here, my dear student, the poet here describes the miserable condition of the children sitting in a classroom in a slum children school. From gusty waves means children are away from the beautiful sides of nature, which is indicated by their appearance. Their hair, which looks untidy and fall on their pale face, is compared to rootless weeds here. As weeds are unwanted in a garden, similarly, the hair on their head appear to be unproductive as well. A tall girl in the classroom with her heavy head looks sad. Her heavy head represents her abnormal growth due to malnutrition. One boy sitting in the class is as thin as paper. He has hollow eyes like those of a rat. He too is the victim of undernourishment due to glaring poverty. Now let's move on to the next part of the stanza 1, that is the stunted unlucky hair of twisted bones, reciting a father's gnarled disease. Lessons from his desk at back of the dim class, one unnoted, sweet and young. His eyes live in a dream of squirrel's game in a tree room. Other than this, okay, now let's move on to the explanation part of these few lines. The poet says that there is a boy who is unlucky as he inherited a disease from his father, due to which he has a deformed body. This disabled boy is reciting his lessons from his desk in the classroom. He too is the victim of poor nourishment. On the back of the dark class, a bright and young boy was sitting. He is sitting there unnoticed and dreaming of squirrels playing in a tree. He appeared to be very promising. The dull and uninteresting ambience in the classroom has failed to arrest his attention. The boy thinks of squirrel's game into the hollow of a tree rather than this cramped classroom. Okay, now let's move on to the next stanza, that is stanza 2. On sour cream walls, donations, Shakespeare's head, cloudless at dawn, civilized dome, riding all cities, belled, flowery, Trialis valley. Okay, now let's move on to the explanation part. The walls of the classroom are pale and dirty. On these walls, a lot of donating teaching aids have been put up. These objects on the walls represent the world of the rich and the prosperous. One of them is the picture of William Shakespeare. The other picture shows early morning sky without any tinge of cloud in it. The picture of high-rise domes of modern civilization represent the quality of life in those cities. There is also a picture of the beautiful Trialis Valley, a region in the Austrian Alpine province, adorned with flowers. Unfortunately, these colorful pictures on the walls have no relevance in the lives of the slum children. The world depicted on these walls is not the world of the children. Their world does not contain huge domes or advanced civilization or the scenic beauty as presented in the pictures on the wall of the classroom. Therefore, the poet says that the teaching aids that have been donated for the school are of no relevance to the poor slum children, as they cannot relate these pictures and civilization to their own life in the slum. So as the children cannot relate those teaching aids to their life, therefore these teaching aids are irrelevant to the poor slum children. Now let's move on to the next segment, that is the next part of stanza 2. Open-handed map awarding the world its world. And yet for these children, these windows, not this map, their world, where all their futures painted with a fog. Well, the world map hung on the classroom displays the names and locations of various countries of the world. Awarding the world its world means that the world map depicts various countries of the world. But these countries are outside the reach of the slum children, and hence the world map has no importance for the children. The life existing outside the window of the classroom is the actual world of the poor slum children, and not this map which is there on the walls of the classroom. Unfortunately, their world is painted with fog. Fog here is a metaphor for something which is hopeless, okay, and uncertain. Their future is grim and uncertain. Now let's move on to the next segment, that is the part 3 of stanza 2. A narrow street sealed in with a lead sky, far, far from rivers, caves and stars of birds. Let's move on to the next part. Their future is sealed with a dark and dark sky. Their future refers to the future of slum children. The poet again says that their world is far away from the actual world of rivers and caves. Caves refers to landscape. Stars of words here refers to the acquisition of radiant light of knowledge, which is like stars in the sky and impossible for slum children to reach out to. These children are far away from the bright light of knowledge and education. Therefore, their future is filled with fog, that is uncertainty. Now, let's move on to the next part, that is stanza 3. Surely, Shakespeare's is wicked, the map a bad example, with ships and sun and love tempting them to steal for lives that slyly in their cramped holes from fog to endless night. Now let's move on to the explanation part. The poet says that the picture of Shakespeare on the classroom wall is irrelevant or meaningless, as slum children will have no opportunity to read books of William Shakespeare. Similarly, map is a bad example, as these poor children can never visit such places as mentioned in the map of the classroom wall. The beautiful world depicted or presented on the classroom wall, like the sun, sheep, love, and care, only tempt them to steal because they cannot have access to this material world. They live in cramped houses and there is no end to their misery. Their continued exercises will result in eternal fog and uncertain future in their lives. Now let's move on to the next segment, that is the part 2 of stanza 3. On their slag heap, these children wear skins peeped through by bones and spectacles of steel, with mended glass like bottle beads on stones. All of their time and space are foggy slum, so blot their maps with slums as big as doom. Now let's move on to the explanation part. These kids are so thin that one can easily see their bones through the thin layer of their skin. The perpetual or eternal state of poverty is highlighted when the poet says that the glasses which they wear are cracked and look like broken pieces of a bottle on a stone. The future of these children is uncertain. Therefore, the map on the classroom actually here represents the pathetic slums for the children, as they have no access to the world depicted in the map. Therefore, the world map is their congested or cramped and foggy slums only. Next stanza, that is stanza 3. Unless governor, inspector, visitor, this map becomes their window, and these windows that shut upon their lives like catacombs break open till they break the town. Now let's move on to the explanation part. The poet means to say that unless government authorities like the governor and inspector visit the school and provide the infrastructure and educational resources to the slum children, their situation will not improve. If they are not given basic education, their map in the classroom will be just the cramped slum outside the classroom window. Like the tomb or cemetery confines the dead body under the soil, likewise the slum children who live in the congested slum which exist outside the classroom will restrict the growth and development of the child. The poet therefore requests the authorities to voluntarily take initiatives to facilitate basic education. Otherwise, these children will grow up to become violent and indulge in destructive activities. Now let's move on to the stanza 4. And show the children to green fields and make their world run azure between gold sands, and let their tongues run naked into books. The white and green leaves open, history theirs whose language is the sun. Dear students, please pay attention here because this stanza is very difficult. Here you see, run azure between gold sands refers to these children should be allowed to run freely on the golden sands under a clear sky. Golden sands here refers to the nature, the open, the landscape, the nature, which also contributes to the growth of children. Run naked into books refers to the children should read out the books loudly. History theirs whose language is the sun. They make history who is educated, who are educated and enlightened. Now let's move on to the explanation part of the stanza. The poet implores or appeals to the government authorities to provide natural ambience in the form of making parks, garden for the children, as nature plays an important role in the holistic growth of children. The poet also appeals to the authorities to ensure that the children get free education in natural setting, which is an ideal learning environment. The poet also says that those who are educated and enlightened can make history with their contribution in the world. According to the poet, history is written by those whose language has the radiance and energy of the sun. Here, the poet refers to having access to education in the lap of nature. For the children to have holistic growth, they need to have the ideal environment, okay, which is very much convenient for the children for their holistic growth. So now let's move on to the next part of the poem, that is literary devices. First, simile, like rootless weed. Children are compared with rootless weed here. Then, like bottle beads on stones, repaired spectacles, okay, here are compared to bottle beads on stones. Next is metaphor, like in the poem is mentioned, paper singing boy. Here, boy is compared with a paper because he is as thin as a paper. Next is sour cream walls. Walls are described to be dull as sour cream. Next is allusion. Allusion, my dear students, refer to reference from history, literature, mythology, etc. Here, Shakespeare's had Tyrolese Valley. These are the reference to well-known person or place. Therefore, they are allusions in the poem. Next is anaphora. Anaphora here refers to use of repeated words in two consecutive lines, like run azure and run naked. Repetition of the word run in two consecutive lines. So, that's the end of the explanation part of the poem, my dear students. And for the detailed question and answers related to this poem, please visit my blog, that is literaturewithmonotosh.blogspot.com. Thanks for watching. My next poem is A Roadside Stand. Till then, bye bye and take care.